Hi Ryan, how you doing?
Hey, good. By the way, how are you guys doing in South Africa? Are you still quarantining? Has the
Oh
curve been
wow,
flattened?
it's crazy what happened over here. It's
Jesus.
crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean that's what's so crazy about just when the pandemic and quarantine was starting to feel normal and for whether it's all just we're in America anyway. We're just pretending that it's starting to get better again. It was working. I was like, I guess it's getting better, and I guess things are kind of normal, and things are slowly starting to open up. I think we were going to able to go to restaurants soon, and then this shit happens with the George Floyd killing and these massive protests, and which is amazing and great. But it is a little creepy to look and see pictures of the military, of the National Guard on the streets of Hollywood Boulevard and being like, and then having an actual legally enforced curfew at 6 p.m. and being like, oh, we could get arrested if we go outside, or we could, or worse, and that's a whole thing that we're trying to figure out because the first time it happened, the first day, my girlfriend and I were like, we would go on these walks every day, and it's like, oh well, maybe we should, come on, like we could take a walk around the neighborhood, and then we completely felt bad because I see a post on this app called Nextdoor that's like, I see all these hipsters walking around. They have the privilege to walk around after curfew, but because they're white. And I was like, yeah, that's true. Like we're just like, well, I'm not. Screw curfew. I'm gonna walk around. Like, well, yeah, because the chances are of us actually getting harassed are pretty low.
hundred
So I don't
percent.
know if you and your country would understand racial tensions at all, but let me tell you something.
Where do I
America
even
has quite
start?
the history. Yeah. Um,
Yeah,
so anyway, it's just a bizarre time, and the fact that you, a guy in South Africa, can start a podcast where you can talk to a comedy writer in Los Angeles over the internet while Donald Trump is president, and we're both locked in our houses for quarantine. I mean, this is the definition of the future,
yeah,
right here.
it's
What's happening?
100%. So I kind
Yeah.
of wanted to start off with the interview with, you know, were you kind of always inclined to go and do like entertainment? Did you come from like an entertainment type of a family?
Yes, technically I did. My dad owns a comedy club in Michigan. I'm from the suburbs of Detroit, Michigan. And so I grew up, he started that club in 1979. So I grew up going to that club as a kid. And I saw, I'm trying to remember who I probably saw Gary Shandling at some very young age. I actually saw the movie Empire Strikes Back in the theater with Bob Saget. Um, I remember going to a Tigers game with Tim Allen. Tim Allen started there. Dave Coulier from Full House. I saw Jim Carrey at my dad's club for my 16th birthday with like six other friends. That was incredible. I saw Ellen DeGeneres there, Rosie O'Donnell. I mean, so many people played there throughout the 80s, 90s, and still to this day, he still keeps up with like booking good relevant acts as opposed to just going on autopilot, just booking the same people over and over again. And so yeah, so that obviously was a huge influence on me. I think it shaped me in a way where I was like, I don't think going a traditional route was ever an option. Obviously, then I was a kid, I was also into cartooning, so I think those two things obviously converged specifically with Rick and Morty, but it sort of ultimately is why I was more interested in like narrative writing than I was in stand up, which I did do for a while, or improv or anything like that. I always wanted to get into narrative writing. So
Where So, you're saying that you were exposed to like all of these comedians. Were any of these specific comedians like an influence on your writing?
sure. I mean, I think Jim Carrey was a huge influence. I mean, there was I could rattle off all the movies and TV shows and even comic strips that influenced me. I remember Mad Magazine was a huge influence on me as a kid because it was the first time that I started to understand the political world through the lens of Alfred Newman, and I was like really like I was like, oh, there's bad guys and there's good guys, and these guys are stupid because they wear funny things in their head. I mean, I'm not, maybe it was a little bit of Reagan era racism or at least xenophobia, but it's funny because I did comedy with I love this story so much. I did comedy with Kumail Nanjiani. We came up together in Chicago. And I remember one time we bonded over Mad Magazine, and he told me that as a kid, because he grew up in Pakistan, and he said that somehow they like Mad magazines which weren't sold in Pakistan and in stores the way they were here. So they were like smuggled over. I can't remember from relatives in America or somewhere. And because it's a Muslim country, they have a lot of regard for the Ayatollah Khomeini. So at the same time, I'm in America, like being like the Ayatollah Khomeini is a douche, because that's what Mad Magazine says. He was reading it, going, Ayatollah Khomeini is a douche. Why are they saying that?
Yeah.
And so I just think it's so funny how that kind of shapes your mindset. But yeah, so that Jim Carrey was, as far as the stand-ups I saw, he was the number one influence on me as far as the people I saw, because his stand-up was just so fucking weird. And I always just wanted to do comedy like that, just not the traditional, set up premise observations about marriage or, I mean, whatever. Not that meat and potato stuff can't be good, but he was like doing impressions of Jimmy Stewart during a nuclear war, and I'm like, that's a fucking crazy premise, and I want to write stuff like that.
And I mean, you could see that sort of like absurdity in your work, like from Community to Rick and Morty, like it's very prevalent over there.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll take more credit for the Rick and Morty of it, because I came into Community so late that style was already established. But I also like, hold on, I'm gonna turn my do not disturb on. So I saw Heat, Vision, and Jack, which was, I don't know if you know what that is, Dan Harmon and Rob Schraub's pilot for Fox, starring Jack Black. So it was a pilot they did for Fox in 1999, directed by Ben Stiller, starring Jack Black, and Owen Wilson is the voice of his motorcycles, sort of like a 80s kind of primetime drama spoof, like, shows like Knight Rider and I don't know, the Incredible Hulk, the classic story of a guy going from town to town while he's being pursued, and a little adventure every week. And so when I saw that, which I think I saw in like 2001 on like a bootleg VHS tape, that also was another major turning point. Like, oh my God, that's the kind of TV I want to write. And so I became so obsessed with their sensibility. And so when I found out about this thing they started called Channel 101, which really was the kind of creative, like, breeding ground for a lot of the people that, certainly created Rick and Morty. I mean, that's where I met Justin Roiland, because at the same time we both started doing stuff for Channel 101 and got on Dan's radar. And so that was that Dan's sensibility already obviously was already keyed into what I was interested in anyway. So he, created Community, and that was such an expression of his creative spirit. And then I was like, well, obviously I want to work on Community, but I didn't even work on Community until after I'd already worked on, I think, the first or second season of Rick and Morty. I went to the fifth season of Community. So, long-winded way of saying, I feel like getting in on the ground floor of Rick and Morty with just those three guys, us three guys in a room together, which we'd already been doing podcasts together and Channel 101 together. That was like, all right, now we can do all this stuff like a band where we all kind of have come together and we figured out our voice collectively and turned that into a show. So I'll take more credit for that influence on Rick and Morty from my what I bring to the table than I would Community.
Absolutely. And I read that you went to community college. Was there any like influence or real life experience that you brought to the show Community?
No, I think if anything, you could peel it back, because by the time season 5 was by the time we did season 5, it was such an absurd caricature of the first, what it was. Like the first few seasons of Community, really, or the first season was a pretty grounded show about some college kids. By season By season 5, it was just like we're doing the lava game, the one that actually the episode that sent off Troy, Donald Glover, his last episode. That was just an absurd, heightened, crazy land thing. What once again, what am I going to bring to the table from my experiences at community college is going to inspire that? It was more just my love of the absurd that, these early influences you asked me about, that's what kind of I brought to season 5 and 6. The little I did bring. Yeah.
Absolutely. could we expect like a Community movie anytime soon?
I don't know. I'm pretty out of it. I know about as much as anyone does from just the internet. I think Dan and the cast did like a table read over Zoom of a season 5 episode, and I think they broached it then, and everybody said they were in. But I mean, look, there's a pandemic. Number one, ain't nothing getting shot, and number two, all those people can say something over Zoom, but they all have very busy schedules. So who knows?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then obviously like writing from a show like Community and then going to a show like Rick and Morty, what was that kind of like, from the live action towards like animation in that sort of a sense?
Well, I mean, like I said, I worked on Rick and Morty first. So for me, I did come from live action in a sense before, because I did a lot of live action shorts, and then I worked on a couple, maybe 1 or 2 live action shows that weren't part of the whole Justin and Dan world. And I think that the biggest difference isn't the difference between animation and live action, which everybody always asks about, and I can go into what the differences are, pros and cons or whatever. But really, the biggest difference was writing something with my friends that was essentially just an extension of, like I said, the stuff we'd already been making. Channel 101 web series. I made a web series with Dan called Water and Power. I made a podcast with Justin called Grandma's Virginity Podcast. And like, we were already used to working together for free with no, like when you work on a TV show, most of the time it's like you're hired and there's a boss and you get along with people, and they may share your sensibility, they may not. Comedy writers, I guess, by default share a relatively baseline sensibility. But this was like the 3 of us in that first season in a room together. I was like, oh my God, we can do what we are already doing for free, be as crazy as we want to be. No one's telling us what to do. And on top of that, we're on a network that doesn't give a fuck. They want us. It's the Adult Swim. If anything, we were like the more conservative Adult Swim show at that point, because we were like, we weren't just going nuts, like off the rails, subverting everything that most Adult Swim shows would do.
Is there anything like
so
off
that's
balance?
The key difference.
Absolutely. Is there anything off balance, like with regards to Adult Swim? Is there anything like that you guys would pitch for Rick and Morty where it would be like, no, you guys can't do this?
I mean, I if there was, it was very little. I think that I often, whenever anyone asks me that, it's like, it's almost like the same. It's in the same wheelhouse as the question of like, how high were you guys when you wrote that? Which is like, the answer is, well, Dan was drunk, but the rest of us were stone cold sober. And well, okay, maybe not everybody. Now that I'm thinking about it, but certainly the image of a bunch of comedy writers like ripping bong hits in Rick and Morty writers room being like, what if this happened? What if Rick and Jerry were in a simulation? Like, no. That was the result of like banging our heads against the wall, just trying to engineer something that made sense and, from a kernel of inspiration. It wasn't like the whimsical, stream of consciousness tripping of a drug-addled mind. So anyway, to answer your question, what was the question? Sorry, I'm really high right now. I don't get high for writers' rooms, but podcasts, I get super baked. No, you're talking about, oh yeah. So it's the cousin of that question, is the like, oh, is there anything so crazy that you guys, Adult Swim was like, whoa. And the answer is, we would police ourselves before Adult Swim police us. We would go like, come on, Justin, we're not going to do that. That's too violent for violence sake, or whatever. There was maybe 1 or 2 times that I can recall vaguely that Adult Swim was like, this is too much. I mean, if anything, it was like, I remember we did some episode where the end that we wanted to include like a celebrity. I can't remember. It's like it's one of my least favorite episodes, but it's the episode where Morty has like a sex robot, and then it's Summer and the Gazorp on the B side of the story, and there's something at the end where it's like the creator of Marmaduke, I think, is a character in the show, And I remember there was a lot of talk about who that was going to be, and like so many legal issues about how you can't do that person and you can't do this person. So it's like boring stuff like that that we had to
Absolutely.
change. Yeah.
You know, like something that I find so interesting about the show is so many like adult cartoons tend to veer off into like the realm of like political satire, like South Park and Family Guy. But you guys always manage to remain in that like philosophical sort of a realm. How did you guys manage like not to sort of veer off into that sort of like a political sphere or like parody or that sort of a thing?
Well, I mean, I think that we did a couple times, and I think it was an intuitive thing. It was never as good. I mean, I think that the show works best for me personally when um, it's grounded in the reality of the world, and it's not commenting on anything in our world necessarily. I mean, it can in subtle ways, but like we did that episode where Jerry and Morty go to Pluto, and it's a thinly veiled analogy for climate change denial. And I'm like, it's not a great plot. It's not very memorable. And so the same could be said for spoof. I mean, we would do spoof. Like there's that episode where they shrink down and they go into the homeless guy's body. Fun fact, that character is named Reuben Ridley, the homeless Santa Claus. So they
Oh,
go into
that's
his
crazy.
body. Yeah. Well, it's just Dan went Reuben
I wonder
Ridley.
where that influence came
Pretty
from.
easy. Yeah, exactly. He's not as smart as people give him credit for being. Anyways, that was just like a Jurassic Park spoof meets Fantastic Voyage or Inner Space, any one of those tropes. And once again, that's a fine episode, but it's not like as great as the episodes that were really just like rooted in a world and in particular a story that could exist on its own as a sci-fi story, stripping away all the jokes or stripping away any references. So I think to answer your question, like, South Park's brand was that from more or less the beginning. Like, we're gonna take the piss out of our culture and out of politics and stuff. And they were doing it on a weekly basis, so they could literally rip from the headlines, which we weren't doing just because of the production. We'd write an episode and a year later it would come out. And then the spoofs, it's like, I don't know, who gives a shit. I wasn't, I'm not a part of the show as far as the fourth season, so I don't know. But it's like when you're just doing a pure spoof of something, then once again, it's like Rick and Morty should exist in a world where they're not commenting on what's outside of their world, or rather what's in our world. They should be in their own world with their own stories. The closest we came was that Citadel of Ricks episode, which was the one I wrote with Guterman, which was the seventh episode of season 3, which is clearly both commenting on politics and it's spoofing things. But I'm going to give it a pass because I wrote it with Guterman, so whatever.
Absolutely. That you guys overlap quite a lot of like sci-fi films, like you said, like Jurassic Park, and you'll do like several references in one episode. Have you ever gotten like feedback from any of the people that created these movies to say like, I love the show, or like, I don't really love the show?
Oh yeah, I'm not sure about specifically the references, but I know early on it was exciting to see celebrities coming out of the woodwork and being like, I love this show. And we'd start to see nods to Rick and Morty. And like, I remember when the Comic-Con, I think of 2016, when they released the Justice League trailer, and clearly Zack Snyder was a fan, and he put a clip of Rick and Morty in the background on a computer screen in the Flash's bedroom or whatever. And so that stuff was always great and exciting. And as far as people who we directly would reference anything, I mean, a lot of the times, like, it's such a big, like, Spielberg certainly didn't go like, oh, you guys really got me with that Jurassic Park and a homeless man's dead body episode. But I did just see something about the Zoom reunion for Back to the Future, which of course the Rick and Morty characters in themselves are takeoffs of Doc and Marty from Back to the Future. And I didn't see the clip, but I read a description of it where I think Josh Gad or somebody brought up Rick and Morty, and like the text describing whatever happened next was like, it was clear that the cast had was only dimly aware of Rick and Morty, you know. So I guess that's the big one, is like, you think that the creators of Back to the Future, which is the biggest touchstone for Rick and Morty, they clearly are not watching it or have any opinion on it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Just to kind of shift it a little bit, that video released of Justin Roiland where he was getting like excessively drunk while playing like Rick, and then he said that Dan Harmon actually makes him get into character like that. Did that happen for all you guys, and was that like sort of a frequent occurrence?
Well, us having to get wasted to get into our character.
Yeah.
No. I actually, what do you mean? You mean specifically with Justin, or what do you mean?
With Justin and the rest of you.
I mean, I don't know. Justin, I think Justin always claimed that he drank so he could burp. And it was like something, he had a specific beer he drank, like something really like natural light, or something, like some weird, gross light beer that he would have at the records that he would drink for just the burping. And then there was that episode where the whole idea is that Rick is like the drunkest we've ever seen him, the superhero episode. And I think that Dan wanted him to get like genuinely wasted for the parts where Rick was genuinely wasted. And I can't remember, like, I think there's that BTS is like from one of the records, and like from what I vaguely remember, like they didn't even use a lot of that. Like it was just too unusable. So they actually like went back with Justin acting drunk, which by the way is exactly what happened with what's his Quint in Robert Shaw's character Jaws. Is he like apparently got like hammered for some scene in Jaws? I think the scene where he's telling the story about the USS Indianapolis, where he's giving that monologue about the shark's eyes, and apparently he was really hammered, and he thought, this is how I get the character because he's drunk. And then Spielberg is like cutting it and is like, this ain't working, and so they had to reshoot it with him sober. So I think it was the same. I think it was the same thing. Yeah.
Speaking of like 100%, that's hilarious. Speaking of like long processes, why does it take so long to actually make an episode?
Dysfunction. Complete dysfunction.
Is it really true what they say about like Dan Harmon being this absolute perfectionist, where you guys will like start an episode and then you have to redo it just because like it has to be like to the T, like perfect?
Yeah. So things would get, rewritten obsessively, or they would go to animatic and then get reworked. And that's a stage where we're not only rewriting, but you're actually having the animators and the artists redraw. And then Dan is rewriting lines and having Justin re-record lines. And, I don't want to talk about rumors, because I just heard that like in season 4, they were just throwing out entire animatics, which we never went that far in the first 3 seasons. We put, the production team through hell as far as like revising animatics that were almost, it was like doing reshoots. It's like, okay, we're changing this, but it's still all the same fundamentals. So we never would get rid of an entire episode. But yeah, look, that's to say it's just perfectionism is, I think, being a little too kind. I think there was a lot of, there's a lot. I can keep it real. What are they going to do? It's a lot of dysfunction. It's, you can't operate that way and have things be chugging along like a Swiss watch or German train. Let's just put it that way.
Was there any kind of on that note, was there any pitches that you brought to the table in terms of storylines that you adamant that would have like killed it, but that just didn't maybe make it?
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. I'm trying. I should be better at recalling these things, because they're the things I probably were like, one day I'll get asked on a podcast about this idea and you'll all see how great of an idea it was. But yeah, there was lots of stuff. There was one, this is something that I did get a little vindication for. There was an episode or a storyline I pitched where it was like, Jerry or Morty, I guess, like it was a Rear Window spoof where he starts to be he sees the man on the moon, and then he is telling everybody he saw a man on the moon with his telescope, and nobody believes him. And then the man shows up in their neighborhood, and that became a Morty's mind blower, if you recall. So that was like whatever that was, like a 3-minute version. But I pitched that. I was adamant that should be a whole fucking B story. And everyone was like, I remember everybody kind of looked at me like, okay, man. I was like, no, this could be fucking great. And so then I got to do it as like a 3-minute Morty's mind blower sketch or whatever you want to call it. And I think it's a proof of concept. It works. But there was plenty of stuff. I mean, God, there was an episode that we were working on. Like, so there was like stuff where I remember me and Guterman, this is another writer on the show, Dan Guterman, for season 2 and season 3. We became really tight. We worked on a couple episodes together. He told me that, and I don't remember this that well, like there was an episode that we were both adamant about where it's like Rick and Morty do a heist on Heaven, where like it's sort of like the movie, God, what's that called? They just did a remake of it. It was an 80s movie where these people kill themselves, like these college students kill themselves, and then they're able to kind of die for a period of time, and they wake back up. And we're like, oh, what if we take that logic and they can kind of kill themselves, and then they can go to heaven, so then they can do a heist in heaven, and then they can come back somehow with whatever they're stealing. And I thought it'd be a really cool way to kind of deal with Rick and Morty in the Judeo-Christian idea of the afterlife, which I think is why Dan didn't want to do it. Because he's like, if we start dealing with the Judeo-Christian afterlife, like then that means that exists in our world. And I thought, well, sure, but maybe we can have a little fun with it. We can actually give it a sci-fi explanation. Like this is another dimension, another reality that humans have called heaven or hell for thousands of years. I totally get it, because we did straight up an episode with the fucking devil. So we established that the devil exists in the Rick and Morty universe. So, sometimes there'd just be things that would get shot down for a lot of various reasons that were understandable, I guess, at the time.
Absolutely. And like when you guys are actually constructing a world, like as a writer, do you and the animators have like a similar idea of what that world might look like, or what those characters might look like that you might write in?
No, I mean, I tell the story all the time about the Meeseeks when I had written that episode, and then I think I saw the first batch of character designs, because that's what'll happen is it's like here's 10 ideas for what this character can look like, and Justin or us in later seasons that were the writer producers would have say in that, and so we go like, no, I don't like that, or I like that. And the first batch of Meeseeks were closer to what they ended up as, tall. But having written, this is after the episode's written, imagine them as being like small, like this is smaller than what I mean, but it looks like this, like Smurf, like a Smurf size, right? Like a little tiny, like 3 apples high. And so, there's those scenes in the restaurant with Jerry and Beth having a romantic dinner, and then they all come in horseback and stuff. Obviously this wouldn't work on horseback necessarily, but I just imagine them like being like these tiny little creatures who jumped on the table and are like, whatever they're doing, like have a gun or whatever. I can't remember what they're doing in that scene. I was like, that's going to be, funny that they're small. And there's this big fight because it was actually, I always say it was like the internet meme, like the blue dress, gold dress or whatever that was. Where like half the people in the writing staff and the artists or whoever thought that they were to scale of human scale, and half thought they were like tiny. And so it's funny how like just you can read the same thing and picture something totally different. I guess it never was written that their scale in the script, so everyone just kind of imagined their own thing. And so that's a perfect idea. There's tons of other situations. There was like an episode, the episode in season 2 where Rick and Morty go into the battery, and they keep going into kind of a successive series of worlds within worlds. And something happened. My microphone just went out. And And so there was a part where they're in the third or fourth, whatever it was, world, and there's these characters that were described as tree people. And the first batch of designs were like literally like Lord of the Rings style, the Ents, like tree people, like people made from trees. And I was like,
Yeah,
no, they're humanoid beings who live amongst the trees. They're like native, arboreal tribes, like they're not humans, but they live among. Anyways, and in my mind at the time, that was just like it was just a there was a red line drawn, like it had to be that and not literal tree people.
absolutely. Have you guys ever thought about doing like, or did you guys ever think about doing like how Family Good guy did like the whole Blue Harvest thing, where they did like a three-part Star Wars sort of a parody? Did you guys ever think about doing like one central sci-fi parody throughout a couple of episodes?
No, like I said, I don't think the parody is. I don't think it's as good when we do parody in Rick and Morty. I thought that the closest thing to that was we did the 2-part season 2 cliffhanger, season 3 premiere, which was when Rick gets arrested at the end of season 2 by the Galactic Federation, and then in season 1 he's rescued by Summer and Morty and stuff, and it becomes this whole. That's when the we started drawing upon this past mythology and calling back to a lot of stuff. And in a way, you could say that was a parody of Rick and Morty, because we're like, hey, remember Bird Person? Hey, remember the Cronenberg dimension?
Yeah.
And there was a lot of just debate over whether that was like too much fan service stuff. But at the very least, it was our own sci-fi plot. It was our own epic storyline. It was our Star Wars. And I think that's way better. And that's way more Rick and Morty than just if we had done a spoof of literally Star Wars. I mean, by the way, not that I'm above it all the time. Like another thing I was pushing for a long time ago was a cold opening that was just a straight up homage to Dune, because I just love Dune, especially the 1982 or 5 or whatever David Lynch version. And I was like, I had this whole the idea with like there's this fucking crazy worm creature on like a floating tank in that movie, and I was like, it's going to be that character a little bit tweaked, so it's not just a straight up ripoff. And I love that world. And that they shot that down. I can't remember why they shot that down, but that was just gonna be a cold open. Okay, it wasn't gonna be a whole spoof of an episode or of a movie in an episode.
Absolutely. I can't wait to see the new Dune, by the way, especially with
with the director Denis Villeneuve.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
I think it's going to be a.
I mean, I was thinking about that this morning. I don't know why. Why did I think? I think I woke up thinking, for whatever reason, like, oh, did they shoot that Doom? Is that able to come out? That Dune, is that able to come out? Like, I couldn't remember if there was like when it was one of those movies where they had to shut down everything. Back to Mad Magazine. I remember as a kid, another character I was aware of was Botha. Remember Botha?
I actually used history? To collect. PW Botha.
Yeah, he was called like I don't remember. I think it was Mad Magazine. It was like Bully Botha. I remember I was just like, okay, like it was like Gaddafi and like Khomeini and Botha and Idi Amin. I was just like, these Mad Magazine caricatures of these '80s geopolitical villains are just etched in my mind.
Absolutely. I used to collect Mad Magazine as a kid because I've been like an avid comedy fan ever since I was little. I used to, like with South Park and Family Guy, like when I was in first grade, I would always go to the DVD store and I'd find a way to like sneak it back to my house without my parents knowing. And then I would also, just like collect Mad Magazine, stand-up comedy, like just all of it was a huge influence for me. So, I mean, that's why, especially like with this podcast now, it's incredible to speak to the people that actually like make this stuff.
Yeah, I mean that's Judd Apatow famously, when he was a kid, and I don't know how old he was, like a teenager, I think, like he would somehow get access to these, like Jerry Seinfeld and Jay Leno and these, who were pre-TV fame at that point, and he just these old interviews of him interviewing them on like cassette tapes and stuff, and then I remember doing that too at my dad's club. I'd like be a fan of somebody and I'd go up and I'd start asking them questions. I mean, that's the whole point,
Kind of like on that note, did you have like a famous, any favorite, like sort of a celebrity that was on Rick and Morty, like a guest sort of celebrity?
I was a fan of personally.
Yeah.
Well, we for there was one episode. It was the God. What was it? I can't remember what episode it was, but we had a lot of the Mr. Show cast. Oh, it was like was it the Rick and Jerry and Beth like hit a deer. I think that's the God. I'm like vaguely aware of these episodes. There's only like I only worked on the like I said the first three seasons like 31 episodes, and I'm like and if there's two stories per episode more on average, it was like that's only 60 stories, and I'm like, oh yeah, there was some episode where Jerry and Beth hit a deer, and I remember we cast like a lot of the Mr. Show. I don't know if you watched Mr. Show, the HBO sketch show from
Of course,
like
with
mid
Bob
'90s.
Odenkirk. Yeah.
Yeah, so we had like Jay Johnson and Tom Kenny was a huge. Tom Kenny is like a recurring voice on Rick and Morty. He's Squanchy and he's a bunch of other characters. And I actually got to
Yeah.
do in one episode the original the 10th I think it's the 10th episode of season one where Rick and Morty first go to the Citadel, and there's that sequence where they're going through different dimensions, and there's the pizza on the phone and the human kind of cycling through, and it's like a pizza on a phone or a phone holding a pizza. It was me and Tom Kenny that were the two voices of those characters, and I was like, oh, this is cool because it's like kind of bridging the spirit of those two shows. So that there was one episode that had like four, I think, cast members of Mr. Show, and then there's another episode, the simulation episode has David Cross. We tried to get Bob Odenkirk, never got him for seasons I worked on. Maybe he's been on since. But that was a really great, just spiritual kind of connection to that show because we all. I mean, I fucking loved watching. That was a huge, influence on me in my early 20s, like watching Mr. Show and just being like, what the fuck is this? This is incredible. And so be able to take that energy and apply it to Rick and Morty, which once again, like Mr. Show, is that similar thing. Like those guys were just friends who created this thing together. And that's always the purest form of comedy. I mean, it's way more pure than like whatever bullshit you see on NBC or ABC, like some
Oh,
sitcom
absolutely.
that's, like, I mean, I shouldn't be talking shit because I might be desperate for one of the, job on one of those shows in the next couple of years. But, I just love the stuff that comes organically and out of just, a pure kind of shared sensibility and a specific point of view.
Yeah.
And anyways,
I've always loved that like absurdist humor because I'm a huge fan of the Eric Andre show,
mhm.
Nathan Fielder, even to an extent I would say like Curb Your Enthusiasm. Just I think it's the future of comedy. Like I really think like on that note, like what you said with the NBC shows, I genuinely think that's a very old form of comedy, and I just think that the future of comedy really is absurdist.
Yeah, I mean, well, so it's like, first of all, I should put an asterisk. Obviously, NBC yielded some of the greatest comedy, including Community and Parks and Rec and 30 Rock and Seinfeld. It's just that I don't know what the fuck they're doing now. I mean, I'm not even watching broadcast TV, so I just get the sense that they're not doing those shows anymore.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's a little unfair to put it all on NBC. I just mean network TV or but yeah, to your point, I mean, it's like these influences end up they I could I love thinking about this stuff, like why the movies in the '80s were the way they were, and it's like you can trace that back to that generation's the Spielbergs and Lucases, their influences growing up in the '50s and '60s, and then that they brought that into their films in the '80s, and it's the same thing with comedy. Growing up in the '90s with the beginning of The Simpsons or SCTV or Get a Life. There was just this absurd comedy. Monty Python, SNL at that time was a lot more absurd than I think it is now. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just remember like Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer was like just fuck, which Bob Odenkirk wrote, was just the most mind blowing sketch to me as a kid. And then I grew up, and I'm like, well, those are my influences, and so then those start becoming, we now I'm the writer of these shows that are on TV, and so obviously those influences show through. And so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think like anything else, things just get more and more sophisticated. And I think there's always going to be whatever shows that you and I aren't going to be fans of just because there's still a market for that kind of stuff. But I think that the comedy is definitely going to get the more sophisticated, interesting stuff, of course, is always going to get rewarded. and then continue to influence the next generation and so on.
Absolutely. You know what I've always wondered from like Rick and Morty, well, actually like a behind the scenes sort of a perspective, you know, when the whole Szechuan thing kind of broke out, what was it kind of like from a behind the scene perspective when all those videos of like people going crazy at McDonald's and like the crazy eBay prices for like the Szechuan sauce? What was it like for you guys?
Mind blowing. I mean, you got to understand, like, I feel like, you know, those documentaries that are like about things that happened like 50, 40 years ago, you got to understand at this time, nobody was playing the harp like this. And suddenly Dougie Three Fingers, Jimmy Jam came in and, you know, he played the harp in a way that nobody ever, he turned it upside down, changed the harp playing forever. I feel like that I'm like one of those talking heads, but like, you got to understand that at that time, like, you know, once again, it was like, even though Dan had community, like I still thought of us as just these guys who were friends who were, like I said, we're doing stuff for free anyway. Like Justin and I did this podcast called Grandma's Virginity Podcast that, you know, like we never got paid for. Nobody ever gave a shit about it except for like a small rabid group of fans who are still asking me about it today on Twitter. And then, and Justin, you know, really hadn't done much. And so when we were doing this show, and also nobody fucking thought Rick and Morty was going to be anything but like another Adult Swim show. I had an agent, I still have an agent, who told me at the time, you know, there was a Fox show that was kind of like trying to poach me. And I was like, I want to work on this show. He's like, come on, man. Like, nobody cares about writers on Adult Swim shows. They, you know, if you're a writer on a Fox animated sitcom, that leads you somewhere in your career. And I was just like, but my gut tells me, and also the money would have been better. And so it just felt like such like, in a million years, the show wouldn't, I'm talking before the Szechuan stuff happened. Like just the fact that anyone would care about it, period. I just never really, no one thought anyone would care about it, period. Like the best we could hope for is Aqua Teen Hunger Force impact on the culture, which is the most impact any Adult Swim show ever had. And that was like a movie that some people saw, but the movie is actually more famous for the marketing campaign that, I don't know if you remember this, but like there was this little like, I can't remember what the characters are, these little pink robot alien things that like somebody put around town somewhere and all over the country, and people thought they were bombs. And like, that was like, look that up. That got more publicity than the movie did. So
I saw the movie. I remember the movie very well.
Yeah. So look into the bomb scare about promoting that. So, anyway, so to have it get to the point where like McDonald's is at first just the head chef of McDonald's, which is a funny oxymoron, tweets out something. We're like, whoa, like the head chef of McDonald's is aware of this. And then to have it go all the way to McDonald's, basically, let's be honest, just ripping off the Rick and Morty fandom, you know, or the Rick and Morty brand for their own promotion, because they re-released the Szechuan sauce with like an alien marketing campaign. Like they never made a licensing deal with you know, with whoever, Warner Brothers, Time Warner, whoever, Adult Swim. So to me, that's just crazy, because McDonald's represents essentially, even though, you know, we're not exactly, you know, Sam Adams or some revolutionary in the streets trying to take down the King of England. From a comedy writing point of view, that's, I guess, what Rick and Morty's energy was. And what is more establishment, King of England, corporate dominating fucking nightmare than McDonald's? You know what I mean? So to have them be like, we hear you and we're gonna fucking totally take some of that revolutionary spirit and slap it on a label and sell more processed mutant chicken meat. It's just bizarre.
Get a little bit more brand exposure.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
So yeah, it was just, yeah. And now they're fucking doing Cheeto or Pringles commercials in the Super Bowl, and it's like, guys, you're just selling out. This is just now you fused with the beast. Now you're one with the machine. You're more
Yeah,
machine than man now. Don't you understand? Have a little,
absolutely.
have a little, I don't know. What's the word? Not pride.
Balls.
Um, well, balls and self-respect. I don't know. Anyway, go on.
Absolutely. How did the whole idea of like Pickle Rick come into fruition?
Dan was drunk, and it was right before Thanksgiving break, and I think Justin had already left town. I don't think you think Justin was in the room, and Dan was, I think, in a passive aggressive way, frustrated because I don't know, the room was cold that day, and who knows, there were some new writers in the room that season, and I think it's sort of an intimidating room to be in. Dan's an intimidating guy to be around. And I think sometimes people freeze up or whatever. There's a million reasons why a comedy writing room is dead from a day-to-day basis. And this is one of those days. And Dan, I think in a passive aggressive frustration, just started to like rattle off a bunch of ideas, just holding his glass of vodka and just kind of rattling off. And he could rattle off brilliant little nuggets of ideas just off the top of his head. And one of them was, after a series of absurd ideas that he knew would never be episodes, he rattled off essentially what was the opening of Pickle Rick. He's like, okay, what about this? What about Morty's brushing his hair in the bathroom, and here's Morty, come here, in the garage. And then Morty, what the fuck? Morty goes in the garage. Morty, over here. Morty looks, sees a pickle. What the fuck? What? And the pickle, Morty, come on, turn it over. Turns over the pickle. Ah, it's Rick's face. And then that was it. That was the idea. And it really was, I think, nonsense. It never meant to be anything of an episode. And then Dan left that afternoon, shortly after that, to wherever he was going for Thanksgiving. And I was in charge of the writer's room at that point. This is where I become my own hype man. So I said, fuck that. We're going to take that idea and we're going to actually turn that into an episode. And so, it was almost like fueled by like Dan, maybe this is me projecting, but I thought he was just trying to go like, I'm going to give you guys turds. And I thought to myself, well, we're going to make this turd into Turdinade. And so we started, and I thought, look, why not? Why can't that be the opening? Why can't that be like, what would happen if Rick was a pickle? You know what I mean? And so then we started all talking about like, well, what if this is Rick's 127 hours or Rick's Gravity? Once again, no one thinks of that episode necessarily as a spoof of those movies, but that's what I thought of it as, like a story about Rick in a situation where suddenly he doesn't have all of the resources that he's used to, including his own body, his hands and legs. And so then, a series of accidents results in him rolling out onto the sun and then ending up in the sewer. And we broke that basic story. And I think the original episode, well, I know the original episode, and this, by the way, folds back into one of your other questions. The original episode did the second half of the story. I think the act break, because Rick and Morty is always a bifurcated act structure, 1 and 2, with a commercial break in the middle. It was, the whole thing didn't take place in like a generic foreign embassy, not in a bad way, but just in the episode, it's a kind of a generic like Eastern European foreign embassy. And it was actually in a restaurant, and it was there was a character who was like a sort of No Country for Old Men style assassin by way of a cockroach exterminator who was called in to take out the weird, at this point, Rick, rat pickle hybrid that Rick was. And so Adult Swim, Mike Lazo, that Adult Swim, said like, I don't really like that. And so we changed it to the foreign embassy and made it a more literal action movie setting. So that's the story of Pickle Rick, and another example of when Adult Swim pushed back, which is very, very infrequent.
Oh, that's crazy. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Like,
I still don't quite understand. I love the exterminator character was really funny because it was like, this exterminator, the cops were, I think, surrounding the building, and then they called in this exterminator who had this mythological energy to him, like, oh my god, the most badass exterminator in the world. To me, that's funny, but yeah, we had to change it.
Yeah. Oh, so that's just like one of those instances, but I explained like kind of previously.
Yeah, I don't to this day I don't know why that was a problem. It wasn't too violent or too politically offensive. It was just he just didn't like the idea of it being an exterminator, so we changed it.
That's crazy. Was there ever like an instance, you know, that it takes so long for it to actually get to air because it takes so many months to make? Was there ever like a last minute sort of a second thought where you thought to yourself, oh shit, we should not maybe air this because this joke like might bomb? Because like in the writer's room, you might have thought to yourself, oh, like this was funny in the writer's room, but actually on air, it might not be as funny.
Meaning because it was referencing something that was specific to that time, and that the joke
Yeah,
wouldn't work as well a year later. I mean, I
yeah,
don't know. There's nothing. If there was anything like that, you know, you could change dialogue up until pretty close to broadcast. You know, like it's called, I think it's color lock or something like that. When the episode is like done, the animation has come back from Canada, fully, full motion, beautiful color, but you could still go in and you can loop. Like I heard that in the fourth season they added some line where Rick references the coronavirus, which they obviously did that right before the
yeah.
episode aired. So, yeah, that is an example. You know, a lot of people ask about the episode of the like I said, the Citadel episode that me and Guterman wrote in the third season, where it's the four different stories at the Citadel, and it's like a very obvious parallel to Trump in some people's mind, and like we didn't consciously think of that, but then obviously the story of a populist, um, dark horse candidate shocking the establishment and winning election. We wrote that episode in 2016. At the end of 2016, we're finishing it up, and so it was right before the election of Trump. So obviously, that's the opposite
Absolutely.
of your question. That was like, ooh, we really figured out a way to kind of this. We don't have to do any changes.
Absolutely. When you guys like first started the show, did you guys have an idea of how it might end?
No, I mean, there was that silly idea that Rick is Morty that I think Dan and got excited about early on. That like pretty quickly people on Reddit started to just speculate about that as a theory,
Or
and
like a
so
Fight
then
Club sort of a thing?
oh what? Oh well,
Fight
no,
Club.
not even that. Like a thing where Morty grew up into Rick, and
Uh,
then yeah, I don't know what the logic of it would be from a sci-fi point of view, or Morty was a clone of Rick that Rick cloned and then put into his own daughter's womb. I don't know how how it would have worked, but and then the whole series is about him training Morty to become himself, uh, become Rick. But so that was the closest I can ever think of. I mean, from the beginning, we didn't really know that the show was going to evolve in the way it did. At least when I was there. I mean, you know, it was mostly organic. I mean, that first the love potion, the love pandemic episode was one of the first two. It was Lawnmower Dog and that love potion number 9 or whatever that episode, Morty potion number 9, something like that. Um, which has the ending where Rick goes, "We fucked this up. Let's just go to another reality," and they go to another reality because he can't fix the Cronenberg problem. And of course, there's that really beautiful sequence where Morty's walking through his house and looking at his family, and that whatever Mazzy Star song is playing. And I think that was probably one of the defining moments of the show, as far as like, oh, this is going to have a strain in its DNA of heaviness and philosophical ponderance, and the possibility that could eventually open up and lead to somewhere else, which it does later on in season 3, like I talked about earlier. But there wasn't some grand plan. It was like just that was going to be a cool, mind-blowing thing to do. And so those seeds were planted, but I don't know if anyone ever thought that they would grow into the epic battle between Evil Morty and Rick and all these other possible storylines, you know?
Absolutely. And then can we expect maybe like a crossover between Solar Opposites and like Rick and Morty? Because I know that you did some voices on Solar Opposites.
Yeah. I just hope I keep getting cast because I voiceover acting is that is some sweet business. They brought me for a voiceover gig I did. They just brought me equipment, and then I just did because the pandemic. I just did the voice acting here, and it takes an hour, and suddenly you're the main character in a one of the main. I won't spoil what this is, but in a video game, so I don't know. As far as a crossover, I mean, I'm curious if they can legally do that. Meaning, a Hulu show and a Time Warner show. Can they legally bring those characters together in some way? This is the not fun part of working in show business is the fucking lawyer shit. Just because Justin created both those shows, I don't think they can actually exist in the same universe beyond maybe subtle references. I wouldn't be surprised if you start seeing that. Artists can always draw things in the background and put things on T-shirts and stuff, but I don't know if you can do a full-on, hey, it's whatever, Korboth and whatever the fuck those characters are, What do you think of Solar Opposites?
I loved it. Loved it.
Okay, cool. I haven't watched. You what?
I'm not gonna lie, I love the whole like wall thing, that whole wall sub storyline.
Yeah, I heard great things about that, and I got to rewatch or not rewatch. I got to pick it back up. I watched the first 2 episodes, and I kept reading about how there's an episode. I think episode 7 really pays off the wall world stuff, and that sounded great. I wanna check that out.
Absolutely. Oh, so you don't even like watch the shows that sometimes you make or like acting, well, voice acting.
I watched my episode of that, yeah, but I didn't watch the whole series yet. No, I listen. This fucking shit that's been going down the last 3 months. I mean, a lot of people's reaction was like, "I just want to escape," and I'm like, man, all I've been doing is watching documentaries, like. I'm like, what the fuck has been? I've been so asleep at the wheel as far as what's going on in our country, and so I'm like the opposite. So I just like for no other reason than I've just been reading a lot more and trying to educate myself. And so I gotta finish watching Solar Opposites. So yes,
you gotta get on it. It's real good. Could you give like a hint of what voice you did for a video game?
I don't know. I don't really know if I'm not allowed. I can give a hint. It's a rebooting of an old franchise that's I guess a bit of a cult franchise, and so they're doing a new version of it, and it's a Rick and Morty writer that's the head writer, whatever you want to call it, producer, creator of it, because it's got these cut scenes and stuff like that. So there's actually going to be a lot of animation that's actually being done by I think it's being done by the same company that animates Rick and Morty. And so there's those scenes that he wrote, and then I do the voice line with a couple of the other great actors that are also have done stuff in Rick and Morty. And then I think. Well, you know what? I don't think I have to be so cagey about it. I think they announced it already. It's the have you ever heard of Battletoads?
No.
Okay. So couldn't you have just lied? Couldn't you have just lied?
I'm from South Africa. We don't have Battletoads.
Battletoads are huge in South Africa.
Exactly.
It was have you heard of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
No.
Oh, in the 90s, the way our business works is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was a hit, and so I think there were maybe 100 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle knockoffs that appeared. Street Sharks, Motorcycle Pizza Mice, or Biker Mice from Mars, and you can go down the whole list on Wikipedia. And Battletoads is one of them. And I think Battletoads, so it had a video game on Nintendo, and I think Battletoads sort of became popular enough on its own that it has its own little cult following. And so yeah, so they're remaking it for it was a Nintendo game, I think, back in the day, and now they're redoing it for, I think Microsoft is doing this. I completely forgot that it was already at like E3 or something like that. So it's not a secret that I don't think that I'm exposing to the world, breaking some kind of NDA.
Absolutely.
And if it is, bring it on.
And we get like 7 viewers, so I mean, you've got nothing to worry about.
But what if 6 out of the 7 are Microsoft business affairs lawyers?
Then it could be.
Then I'm really fucked. Yeah.
Then you could be. You
Yeah.
know, being in quarantine and everything, have you thought about maybe starting your own like animated show, or kind of veering off to go do your own thing?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've been trying to do my own thing for a while. This is the period where I've been trying to get my shit together. I wrote a movie that has been great. I wrote this movie. It was announced, so this is once again not. I'm not talking a turn. It's Have you ever heard of Do you get Dracula in South Africa? At least
Dracula. No, I've never heard of that.
Okay,
No.
well, he's a vampire. They're kind of like your apartheid government. They drain the blood, the life force of the oppressed. No, he.
Analogy
now
on
you get
point.
it.
Analogy
Yeah.
on point.
Yeah. So he. So it's it was a Robert Kirkman, who's the creator of The Walking Dead, came up with this great idea that was it was focused on Renfield, who is Dracula's human assistant, and portrayed in the Coppola movie by Tom Waits as like the bug eating. I don't know if you remember the Coppola movie, the bug eating guy in the cell. And so it's like a modern day take on what it would be like if you're focusing on the Renfield character, if you're like Dracula's assistant who's just been like fucking working for Dracula for 100 years or whatever, and it's just miserable, and you're done. And it's like an action comedy horror movie that they announced like back in November, and I'm so bad at this, I never even tweeted about it or anything like that, but it mentioned my name in the article because I wrote the script. And I think it's great, and I'm super excited for it. I don't know, I'm pretty jaded about like, I don't know what's going to happen. Like these things happen all the time with studio movies where you can write something and you get replaced, or they don't even make the movie, and a million things. But I was really excited about it, and it opened up some doors of opportunity that I'm going to continue to pursue. And also like just movies that's where my passion is right now. But live action movies, I really like. People keep trying to get me to do animated stuff because it's just obvious. Like that's just once again how this business works. Like you make a name for yourself in animation, and then people are like, well, do more animation. I'm like, I like live action. Like I like, the vision for Renfield would be, while it's not exactly Deadpool, it's in that wheelhouse. I love that kind of stuff. Like I would kill to write, a Marvel movie or something like that. And this is sort of a version of that I think is unique in its own world. And I want to keep doing stuff like that. And so that's what I'm working on right now in quarantine.
Specifically the realm of comedy though, or just a broad range of, action, comedy?
Yeah, I mean, I always say like my favorite episodes of Rick and Morty were the ones that felt like mini movies. Like Morty Night Run, which is the one with the Jermaine Clement voiced fart that they kind of go on that crazy action-packed, journey through the galaxy. And that felt like a mini movie. And, the episodes I've written, I wrote both the Evil Morty episodes, the Citadel and then the Tales from the Citadel one also. And I love, and the finale of season 2, I was talking about season 3, like these epic action sci-fi stories, genre stories, that the comedy is just kind of a layer to it, but they could work on their own if you stripped out the comedy. You know what I mean? Like, Like once again, if you stripped out all the comedy from Blue Harvest, the Family Guy spoof, then it's just Return of the Jedi or whatever, the Star Wars trilogy. But I want to be able to do something where if you stripped out all the jokes, it would still be a perfectly functioning action horror thriller, story. And as a side note, huh?
I was gonna say the Marvel movies do that so well, especially like Guardians of the Galaxy and Taika Waititi's Thor Ragnarok.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a tone. I have a friend who told me a long time ago, not too long ago actually, it was maybe like 2 years ago, a year ago. He said he's a director. This guy Jordan Vogt Roberts. He directed this King Kong Skull Island movie that came out in 2017, and he said that because he kind of had roots in comedy too. That's how we know each other. And he said that comedy, like Marvel movies, are the comedy movies nowadays. You know what I mean? Like though, like there's all this talk about how the comedy movie is dead because like the last, I don't know, 10 or so major studio, whatever mid big budget comedies that came out weren't really successful. I mean, there hasn't been like a Ted or a Hangover in a long time. And so he was saying like that it's now Marvel movies, and I mean MCU or Deadpool or whatever, that are the new comedies. Like those are comedy movies that also happen to have epic, superhero storylines in them. And then I read this YouTube or saw this YouTube video. What if I printed out the transcript of YouTube videos and then I just read them? I don't watch YouTube videos. I just read them. And it was talking about how comedy is not a genre; it's a mode. So that just means like unlike a Western or an army film or a romantic thriller or whatever, it's actually not a genre like that. It's just a mode that can be attached to any genre. So you can have a comedy Western like Blazing Saddles or a comedy action movie like Tropic Thunder, war movie, whatever you want to call it. And so now that mode is just attached to superhero movies. So I think that's my fucking jam. Like I don't really have it in me to want to write a Hangover movie. Like it's just like I want there to be, aliens or robots or time travel or something, monsters. Like that's just I can't. I have to be true to myself. I can't run anymore.
Absolutely. And
So,
I couldn't be like more with you kind of on that point, because I think like the whole genre of, or seeing movies like 21 Jump Street, 22 Jump Street, Ted, a lot of those movies are trying to almost be remade, but they'll just go straight to Netflix. And it'll just be some like shitty movie that, that doesn't really make it.
Are you talking meaning like when you say remade, like what do you mean by that?
Not remade, but I'm saying like that style of comedy, like you saying like The Hangover, Ted, 21 Jump Street, 22 Jump Street, you don't really find those movies so much anymore. It's that mode that you're talking about.
Yeah.
There hasn't been a movie like that in a while, like a very good one.
Yeah. So to your point, it's and back to what we were saying earlier, if all those movies you rattled off, I don't Hangover, let's put that aside for right now, but 21 Jump Street and 22 Jump Street is like those Lord Miller guys are great. Like, and those guys have a thing they do that's not, it's like they're the directors, but they're also the writers. They bring the full vision to whatever they do, whether it's Spider-Verse, and they're collaborating with all these people, obviously. Spider-Verse had like a co-director, Rodney Rothman, and stuff like that. But like, those guys have a very specific vision, and like, it's whether it's Dan Harmon or Justin or those guys or the Mr. Show people or Dave Chappelle or Living Color or any Jim Carrey, like it's that very specific unique vision that is the thing that makes something successful. And so when you're funneling that vision through something that's a remake of an 80s TV show like 21 Jump Street or a weird knockoff of Back to the Future via Rick and Morty or whatever, like that's, or Thor, the third I mean, who the fuck thought the third Thor movie would be any good? The first two Thor movies are famously like the worst Marvel movies. Like, yeah. And now the third one, which the third of anything is never good, usually it's like that's the best Thor movie and maybe one of the best of all the Marvel movies. And so, yeah. And once again, Taika Waititi has a very specific vision. He's a writer and a director. And so, when you're talking about, I assume what you mean is like with the Netflix movies, it's like they're just going like, well, let's just take what those things are, the shape of them, but they're not filling them with the visionary, and they're not, and it's just sort of like they're just replicating the frame, but not the engine or the oil or whatever. My analogy for a car.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, anyways, thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you. Me too. I hope
Thank you.
hope it's worthwhile. I hope you get something
Thank
out
you.
of your 7 business affair lawyers for Microsoft get something out of this.
Absolutely. I hope that they don't find it on this small little YouTube page from South Africa.
All right. They will. They're going to find it. I'll tweet it. Well, good luck.